Hello and a very warm welcome to Access Asia. Coming up in the show, a landmark case that sought to compensate the first Vietnamese victim of Agent Orange is thrown out by a French court. Amid a recent uptick in deadly violence in Afghanistan, we meet the trauma psychologists taking their expertise to the airwaves. And China sees an explosion in domestic tourism, with low rates of COVID infection pushing authorities to urge people to explore closer to home. A French court has dismissed a lawsuit against more than a dozen multinationals that produced and sold Agent Orange to US troops during the Vietnam War. The case was filed in 2014 by Tran To Nga, a Franco-Vietnamese woman who says she suffered numerous medical problems after being exposed to the toxic substance used by the US Army to destroy dense jungle and crops during the war. She says she plans to appeal the court's decision. Brian Quinn explains.
War correspondent, soldier, educator, and justice campaigner. Born in 1942 in what was then French Indochina, Tran To Nga covered the Vietnam War as a reporter before joining the communist guerrillas. During a mission in 1966, she was exposed to a strange, unknown substance.
I saw a plane approaching, but instead of attacking, it just flew overhead. And a sort of cloud fell over us, a thick, greasy cloud. Suddenly I was soaked by a gooey liquid, and it made me cough a lot.
That liquid was the US government's latest weapon in its losing battle for control of dense jungle terrain, a highly toxic defoliant known as Agent Orange. From 1962 to 1971, the US military sprayed some 80 million liters of tactical herbicides over southern Vietnam in a bid to deprive communist forces of cover and crops. Agent Orange, among the most toxic, contains high levels of dioxin, chemicals known to cause cancer and birth defects. Effects Nga would come to know all too well in 1968 when she gave birth to a baby girl in the Vietnamese jungle.
She was a normal baby, but 2 days later, her skin started peeling away, and she stopped growing altogether.
Within months, her baby would be dead from a congenital heart defect. Another daughter would later suffer a blood disorder. Nga moved to France in 1993. When she retired, she turned her attention to charity for the disadvantaged, both in France and in her homeland. In 2009, her volunteer work took her to the northern Vietnamese province of Tay Binh, where thousands of children have been born with deformities after their parents were exposed to Agent Orange. It was then she realized the connection.
I felt a lot of guilt, thinking I was the one to blame. I tell myself, what have I done to pass these incurable diseases onto my own children? But now I know it's not me who's responsible. We can now clearly identify the culprit. It's dioxin.
The trip convinced Nga to devote her remaining years to seeking justice for the victims of Agent Orange. She herself suffers after effects from her exposure, including type 2 diabetes and cancer. In the 1980s, US chemical companies agreed to meager compensation for American veterans poisoned by Agent Orange. Up to 5 million Vietnamese were directly exposed to toxic defoliants during the war. They have received nothing.
Afghanistan is reeling from its deadliest attack in over a year after a series of bombs exploded outside a girls' school in a predominantly Shiite suburb of Kabul. Violence has soared in the country since early May, the missed deadline for the US to withdraw the last of its troops. But the reality is that after more than 4 decades of war, the majority of Afghans carry with them the psychological scars of conflict. Psychologists have started taking to the airwaves in a society where mental health isn't always a priority, as our team in Kabul reports.
Jamshed Raza is a star on this TV set.
همگی خوب است انشالله.
The psychologist is the host of a weekly program called Self-Knowledge. It's the most successful program on this private TV channel.
ولی بعد از یک هفته و یک ماه ما به انگیزه میشیم دیگه اون هدف را دنبال نمیکنیم.
ما هدف خود درست انتخاب نمیتونیم، روش درست هدف بلد نیستیم. انگیزه همون نیرویی است که انسان به پیش میبره.
It's complicated for psychologists to work here. It's a war-torn and poor country, and all this affects the population greatly. There's depression and psychological problems. TV is the best way to reach the most people.
After 2 decades of war, about 90% of Afghans need some form of psychological support. But there are less than 300 psychologists and personal development counselors for the population of nearly 38 million people.
This program has had a very positive effect on people, whether they're educated or illiterate. I often meet people who tell me that the program has changed their lives. I know people who were suffering from depression who wanted to commit suicide, and the show helped them get better.
Psychologists are also very popular on Afghan radios. This radio station, made by a woman for women, was launched in March.
به ادامه برنامه روانشناسی کودک با تقدیم سلام خدمت شما شنونده‌های عزیز رادیو بیگم.
This is the most listened to program on Radio Begum. Sadiqa Ahmadi takes questions from women listeners who often prefer to remain anonymous.
مثلا عمه کودکایشان است بله یا خالهشان است مثلا یک مقدار معاش تعیین بکنن که هم ایجاد وظیفه شو بر از اونا و هم اطفالشان به سرنوشت نمانه یا به کس در خانه نمانه.
Women need psychological support the most. They're victims of the way our society works. They call anonymously because they're afraid of being seen as mentally ill. Their husbands might want to get divorced or take a second wife.
Hamida Aman is the founder of Radio Begum. She wants to offer direct and anonymous access to psychological help to women in all parts of the country.
We have other problems we need to deal with. When it comes to women, we don't pay attention to their suffering. We blame it on superstition and use other methods to get help. Religious and traditional methods instead of proper medical care.
In Kabul University, more and more students enroll in studies of psychology with a desire to help those who suffer. However, the students themselves are suffering the full brunt of the war. On November 2nd, Islamic State fighters killed at least 22 people here at the campus. Most of them were students.
جلسه قبل ما در رابطه با نشانه‌ها و علائم اختلال بود. کسی در ذهنش هست؟
دیگه نمیتونه تمرکز کنه. تمرکز اصلا درست نمیتونه.
Many of the students present at the time of the attack suffer from physical and psychological injuries. The University of Kabul, with the Department of Psychology, has decided to launch a training program to treat PTSD.
2 years ago, the university opened a psychological treatment center. Some patients come from outside the university, like this young woman.
دلیل به مرکز مراجعه کردین؟ علت آمدن شما در مرکز چی بوده؟
در خانه هر چیز که باشه باید میخورم زود کار روی کنترل نمیتونم یک وقت مثلا که از کدام گپ بالا پایین بگوی باید میخوره سر
احساس ناامیدی را که احساس میکنی روزانه چند بار به ذهنت میاد؟
که محیط میبینی بیرون میبینی صرف خانه نیست هر چیز در باور است که چی میشه چی هست بیرون میبره مثلا در اینجا زندگی میکنی پس زنده میایینم.
Young people are more interested in psychology. Here, psychological problems are common because of the general context, the suicide attacks, the explosions. They can all lead to war trauma.
With the announcement of withdrawal of all international forces by September, the future in Afghanistan looks bleak to many. Gradually, seeking psychological support seems to be getting a more normal part of life.
Restrictions on foreign travel are still in place around the world, but for China, where COVID infection rates are extremely low, that means an explosion in domestic tourism. In stark contrast to the Lunar New Year, when Chinese people were told to stay at home, the latest national holiday has seen authorities encouraging people to explore the country. And if the crowds at the Great Wall are anything to go by, it's working. Emerald Maxwell has the story.
It's 7:30 in the morning and the Great Wall is already crawling with people. There are hours-long queues before tourists can even set foot on the ancient landmark. Masks are advised but not compulsory, and social distancing is totally forgotten. Crowds that haven't been seen here since before the pandemic, as COVID-19 fears ease in China.
We're safe here in China. Look at all the people around us. The epidemic has passed. It's behind us now. Last year, we were all locked up at home. We didn't dare go out.
Founder of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong, once said, "You are not a hero until you've climbed the Great Wall." There are at least 30,000 new heroes today, paying the equivalent of €6 each on this 7-kilometre section of the more than 20,000-kilometre-long series of fortifications. More than a year after COVID spiralled from Wuhan to the rest of the world, China at least says it has the epidemic under control, and the Chinese are making the most of it.
Unlike the rest of the world, we can do things like this, and we don't even have to wear a mask.
COVID is still spreading in lots of other countries. It's better for our health to remain in China.
And there are so many things to see, places I still haven't been to.
Encouraged by Chinese authorities, domestic travel over the extended May Day holiday even surpassed 2019 levels.
And finally, with art museums across the world still shuttered due to COVID restrictions, a digital ray of hope has emerged in the South Korean capital. A 2.5-minute video installation by British artist David Hockney depicting an animated sunrise has lit up Seoul's K-pop square and will be shown online once a day until the end of May. The artwork, entitled "Remember You Cannot Look at the Sun or Death for Very Long," is intended to be a message of hope amid the pandemic. Well, that's it for this week's Access Asia. Thank you very much for watching. See you again next time.
If you want to really understand what's going on in the world, you need to follow the money.
In People in Profit, we tackle the biggest stories in the global economy and break down why they matter to you.
From mega mergers to market crashes and those new business ideas that just could change the world.
In this economy, it's the show you can't afford to miss.
Join us every week for your essential business briefing.
People and Profit on France 24 and France24.com.